Very welcome to the next journey and through the worlds, but it's also a kind of a globe if we think in transplanetary dimensions, as we were told to do so in the first contribution of yesterday's discussions. I'm not completely convinced whether you are very much interested in my nightmares. But I can say so far that it had to do with family structures. And that means that an element of family feeling of the Käte Hamburger Kollegs was vibrant in this room. I can't tell more than this. So thank you very much for being with us during the last day. And we prepared, of course, to listen to Grönemeyer's Bochum song, because I have to present Bochum, just Volkhard Krech. And the point is that I lived in my youth at this wonderful city, and so you are welcome not only as a specialist in religious sciences, religious studies, where you have become professor some years ago, director of the Käte Hamburger Kolleg Dynamics in the History of Religions between Asia and Europe, as well as of the Center for Religious Studies. Your main research interests cover the theory of religion. We had discussions about this in this room when we started our second year difficult relationship of law and religion. We have done it together here in this room. Besides religious pluralization, globalization, processes of sacralization, religion and violence, religion and art, and history of religious studies. So it is so important for our task to listen just to you, and you're very welcome. The last book that you kindly sent to me, even, with a nice dedication. Wo bleibt die Religion zur Ambivalenz des Religiösen in der modernen Gesellschaft? Transkript Verlag Bielefeld 2011. Und ich entlaste ihn damit von der Selbstbewerbung. Aber es ist einfach spannend und interessant. Lieber Volkhard, jetzt musst du Otto auch noch vorstellen, and I would like to do it myself because he was a fellow at our center, so you see the interrelations and interrelations between the two centers. Thank you very much and very welcome for today's discussions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Werner, for your kind introduction and in general for your hospitality. Yeah, Otto Kallscheuer has been a fellow both at the KHK here in Bonn and last year at the Bochum Kolleg. He is a philosopher and political scientist, and he specializes on the relation between politics and religion, especially in contemporary times. But since I learn a lot of things in historical regards, I asked him to join this lecture and to have a kind of dialogue about religious globalization processes. And thank you, Otto, for agreeing. Yeah, where are the boundaries of religions? Question mark. Considerations on the emergence of a global religious field and on processes of sacralization. Processes of globalization have both impacts on religion itself and on its academic reflection. Deconstructivist insights, as well as the entangledness of different traditions in empiricism, have made it clear that it is not possible to speak of religious traditions such as the Christianity, the Islam, the Buddhism, and so on, as single, clearly defined, or even monolithic entities beyond ideological identity politics. In the following, Otto Kallscheuer and I will reflect on some aspects or give some impressions of our work at the Bochum KHK, some aspects of processes of religious globalization along the following ambivalent or, as one might call it, dialectic issues. Firstly, globalization leads to standardization and structural isomorphism on the one hand, and on the other hand to the enhancement of cultural diversity. So the dialectics is between standardization and diversity. Secondly, disembedding goes along with globalization, but at the same time geographical space has been important and gets relevant more and more again. That is why the term localization has been coined. This term has already been mentioned during our conference. Thirdly, globalization enhances the spread of societal differentiation, including the distinction of religion from other societal fields. But on the other hand, we are witnessing blurring religious boundaries. Re-enchantment is just a key word for this. So these are the three dialectic dimensions along we try to have a kind of dialogue. I would like to start with some brief conceptual considerations on regional religious fields and on emerging global religious field before globalization in a more narrow sense, starting in the early 19th centuries. In a second step, Otto Kallscheuer will comment on this, speak about symbolical and geographical space, and will give some historical examples. I will then mention some aspects of an emerging global religious field in contemporary times, followed by Otto Kallscheuer's considerations on sacralization of politics. This procedure should demonstrate, as I already said, the dialogic style we exercise in the Bochum KHK. This is our Bochum sausage, I call it.
Duisburg has another one.
So eine Leberwurst, ne? Ja. Independent from the way globalization is conceptualized in detail, it covers processes of forced entangledness, another key word we all already discussed. In order to consider the relationality of any given religious entity, I suggest to refer to the field concept of Pierre Bourdieu and to further develop it. Following on from Bourdieu, I do not have a substantial understanding of a religious field. It is not a once and for all times given unit. Rather, it is permanently being constituted, reproduced, and changed by interactions between different elements such as agents, ideas, notions, institutional settings, experiences, artificial objects, and generalized concepts. Within the field approach, the meaning, function, and impact of a single element cannot be understood in isolation, but only in the broader context of mutual relations and attachments. A field of forces is both more and less than the aggregation of single elements and holds them together. It is not to be understood essentially in the sense of a common ground, but as energy. Bourdieu speaks sometimes of a field of forces, as energy between elements that refer to each other, be it consensual or as it is mostly the case, contested. Even conflict is a kind of socialization, as we know from Simmel on. Many integration theories misunderstand this point. be it for the good or worse, socialization is not only harmonic, but as Simmel says, love and war are the most intensive forms of interactions. Furthermore, it is important to distinguish between the inner and the outer boundaries of a religious field. Its inner boundaries are permanently being established and reproduced by the intra- and inter-religious controversy surrounding its conceptual and practical content. Its outer boundaries emerge through the distinction and interferences between religion and other societal fields. And not to forget the interaction between religious practice and its scientific observation, as we do now, which constitutes a field of its own. This is an old and complex hermeneutical issue. After these very rough conceptual considerations, I would now like to turn to a historical dimension. As academic debates show, there is no clear definition of globalization, and we didn't succeed and didn't want to have a consensus on that. This includes the question when globalization starts. To my opinion, there is some evidence for the argument that globalization in its strict sense begins only with modern times around 1800, during the times that Reinhard Koselleck calls Sattelzeit. However, a turning point like this has its origin in longue durée developments, so we have to balance breakthroughs and longue durée perspectives. That is why I should like to start with some historical observations, so to speak, on globalization before globalization. For reasons of time and knowledge, I will restrict myself to the Euro-Asian domain. I would like to refer to the rise of early Christianity with regard to its connection with Judaism as part of the emergence of a Mediterranean religious field and its interferences with politics as an example for the constitution of a religious tradition as a field of interacting elements with inner and outer boundaries. In late antiquity, Islam also comes into play. For reasons of modeling, I distinguish between political, cultural, and religious processes, as you hopefully see on this graphics. And please accept my apologies for oversimplifying a complex historical process. The Roman Empire, uprisings in Palestine, imperial and emperor cult, as well as the Roman practice of crucifixion are among others elements of politics. That's why I placed it in the cycle of politics. The latter three elements enter the other field of forces called emerging early Christianity and are transformed to religious entities. The kingdom of God is understood as distinguished from politics, and crucifixion becomes a religious sign of salvation. But how did this happen? The process can be understood if we consider the attachment of the mentioned elements to other entities, which at the same time constitute the field called early Christianity. Namely, and just an example, common meal communities turn via mystery cults into the Christian concept of Eucharist, which is being attached to the concept of crucifixion. And this process is again accompanied by a transformation of other actants, for instance, from the philosophical concept of logos, the Greek logos concept, via the motive of the theos aner, an oriental figure, and concepts such as resurrection and messianism to Christological concepts. In addition, we have to consider the formation of early Judaism as part of the emerging religious field when describing the rise of early Christianity. Judaism also consists of elements that interact with each other, such as Melchat as the Jewish version of the kingdom of God, Pesach, the concepts of Exodus and covenant, the Torah, and so on. But they also interact with politics and with elements in the Christian field. These mechanisms are the takeoff for the development of a Mediterranean religious field to which Islam later enters, and there are similar processes going on in South Asia, for example, in the action of emerging Buddhism, then the Hindu religious complex, Jainism, and so on. And the East Asian religious field might cover interactions between Chinese Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and so on. So I cannot demonstrate it to you here, but there are similar processes going on in other regional fields. Now, with intensified diachronic and synchronic encounter, object linguistic concepts arise. That's why we have established a group of our own concerned with the semantic history, following on from Reinhard Kollegs' Begriffsgeschichte. They are connected with each other by family resemblances in the sense of Ludwig Wittgenstein. For example, the term religio, and we don't have to restrict only on this narrow term. The term religio that develops in the Latin world includes a semantic overlapping with other notions such as lex, ritus, fides, and so on. The relation between Dhamma and Sasana might serve as an example for the Pali context, and the relation between Din and Iman for the Arabic context. And please excuse my wrong pronunciation. Outer boundaries are established by contrasting notions and respective socio-cultural practices. For example, the meaning of the Latin religio covers the relation to opposed terms, for instance to superstitio on the one hand and scientia on the other. When analyzing interactions between concepts and the respective practice that they cover, we are able to identify regional religious fields such as the Mediterranean, the South and Central Asian, and the East Asian field. However, none of the fields, like any field, are isolated but interact with other fields. But this is no argument for not realizing and recognizing the distinction between different regional fields. The Indian and Chinese rites controversies in early modern times are only most prominent examples of such encounters with impacts at the level of object linguistic concepts. Of course, these interactions proceed between adoption and demarcation, and differences occur. For example, while Lex stresses the ethical and legal dimension, Jiao and later San Jiao accentuate the dimension of teaching. But despite of these differences, all of the mentioned terms are in a mutual dependency, because they are related to each other by translation, contrasting, homogenization, and other ways of comparison. So my argument would be that comparison is not only, it is one academic tool, but not only restricted to our academic perspective, but that the culture and social world itself compares itself permanently by interaction and encounter. The interaction frequency between different religious traditions and respective concepts gets enhanced in early modern times and lead to the transgression of regional religious fields, mainly forced by colonialism, mission activities, and processes of globalization. And this is the time when a global religious field might start to emerge. The impact of colonialism, nation-state building, transnationalization, and globalization on the history of religions is, of course, a huge topic. Much research already has been conducted in this respect. One of the most important results consists of the fact that the Western notion of religion has not simply been exported to other religions, as most of the post-colonial studies still argue. But similar concepts in the sense of family resemblances already existed in other parts of the world, and interactions between different concepts have covered and still cover repercussions on the European field. This is an indicator for the emergence of a global religious field starting in early modern times. Yeah, so far with my first part, and Otto Kallscheuer will now turn to the relation of religious fields and geographical space, and further reflects on pre-modern conditions of emerging religious globality.
Yeah. So, thank you. Funktioniert das? Ja? So, thank you, Volkhard, thank you, Werner, for this invitation. I'm trying to symbolize the interconnection. But
the reason why you were
no. Our dialogical style is also represented by my less technological way of presenting it. I'm not familiar with PowerPoint and something like that. I will try to touch these points, beginning perhaps with a remark that Mira Mussini yesterday quoted from Ian Happing, that concepts are just words at a side. Indeed, concepts, sociological concepts like space, sphere, dear Werner, or field are metaphors. There is always a risk, therefore, of taking them too literally. Take the example of public space. There might be a real place in town, the marketplace, the agora, and at the origin of this concept there is this reference to this real place. But when we today speak of public space, we don't mean any physical space, but a social and symbolical horizon of legitimacy constituted and regulated by public rules, defined by its opposition to the private sphere, to a secret realm of speech and actions, even protected by privacy or even by public reasons, the arcanum imperii, which is something different from the public sphere. So what about the global religious field? It is also a metaphor, a metaphorical notion defined, as Volkhard has done a moment before, by social and symbolical oppositions, inner and outer boundaries of religion. In a rather paradoxical way, this field, the concept or the notion of the religious field, is also referring to geographical space and to historical and religious time. To Weltgeschichte and Heilsgeschehen, as a famous German philosopher Löwit named it. Speaking of a global religious field, we are so using an already future-ridden concept or metaphor, oriented towards a somehow geographical based, but not longer geographical bound horizon of religious revelation and religious or inter-religious encounter. So, historically, the emergence of a global religious field presupposes an element of intentional religious globality, the missionary impulse of religious elites trying to convert or to dominate the whole world. And this missionary idea refers explicitly or implicitly both to the experience of territorial boundary and of boundary shifting or boundary transgression, be it exile or conquest, exodus or hijrah. Second point, missionary expectation and transcendental mobility. So, as I told, only a certain type of religion may push forward to a kind of proto-globalization. Religion that are just ethnic identities might even strive for political supremacy or cultural hegemony, but they would rarely search new proselytes. the very idea of some kind of mission amongst foreigners and non-believers already presupposes a system of beliefs that could reach beyond any given territory, its constituted powers and kingdoms, their relative truth and normal. Such revolutionary or missionary elements of transcendence obviously have characterized in different ways and degrees our Western monotheism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But attention, not every monotheism in history did imply such missionary impulse or transcendental force. And what is more important, and what I personally learned also in Bochum, rather empirically, Buddhism also is a world-transcending religion related to a non-theistic dimension of transcendence. It is no surprise then that Buddhism also has been, from its very origins, a missionary movement. Within the Bochum Institute, the early emergence of translocal Buddhist networks is a team of a special research group focusing on regional and inter-imperial transfers of various Buddhisms or variants of Buddhism between, in their rather technological terminology, various hubs like cities, trading posts, oases, and a network of local nodes. What makes such religious globality possible? It may be an element of cognitive or social disembedding. Volkhard Krech has used this concept, of Charles Taylor also, of core elements of religious belief from current social practices, codes, and thick symbolic routines from the concrete life world of local communities or given societies. So this disembedding of core elements of religious identity that might render some religions potentially more globalizing than others. As mobile message or method now, religion may also become a potentially global force. Its message has become portable and therefore is becoming exportable. So it is now in the eyes, or biblically speaking in the heart, of his adherents relevant for all mankind, independently of their ethnic origin, cultural tradition, or political community. As Holy Scripture, religion becomes portable. The medium is the message. Analogous questions are discussed in some of the Bochum KHK research groups relating to Buddhism. Why did Buddhism prove to be the most mobile religion amongst the early world transcendence religions of India, between Brahmanism, Jainism, and Buddhism? Why Buddhism proved to be more ethnically flexible, for instance, than Jainism? Was it less connected to caste? Just question marks, I don't know. Was Buddhism more apt to furnish a religious identity of ruling elites? It has been an imperial religion. Why did Buddhism suit to some Southeast Asian empires? These are the questions, the historical questions, debated in the Bochum institutes. The last point, prehistories of religious globalization, concerns another necessary preconditions of religious proto-globality. So globalization before globalization. That is the experience of boundary crossing, whether driven by expansion, trade, or migration. The movement towards a space of religious globality begins when and where the communicability of some religious messages reach beyond a particular territory or people or kingdom. The early high cultures already knew regional religious systems, somehow coinciding even with their international political systems. Regional empires like Egypt, Hattusha, and others recognized each other also via reciprocal recognition of their respective pantheons, as early diplomatic documentary, for instance, the famous letters and treatises of Amarna can show. But for any intentional religious globality, other factors were needed, not least the technical and political infrastructure of trans-regional communication across geographical barriers and across political boundaries. In the geographical field between Europe and Southeast Asia, these infrastructural preconditions have been at least two possible kinds: imperial expansion and trading routes, sometimes connecting trading diasporas. Both developments don't exclude each other, they may even favor each other in some cases, in others they don't. It was a changing political environment that changed the practicable routes crossing the Hindu Kush and connecting Central Asia to India that were so important for the pilgrimage of eminent Chinese Buddhist monks to the holy places of the Buddha, especially to Kanishka Vihara, where the alm bowl of the Buddha could be visited. When after the end of the Kushana Empire in northwest India, the Heftalists built another empire, reaching from today's Turkestan to Persia, also the pilgrim routes from China to northern India had to change. So imperial expansion can close the way for trading routes or may open zones formerly territorially closed by natural, geographical or political barriers. So did the great Alexander's campaign in the 4th century before the Common Era, connecting the Mediterranean to the Indus, constructing the first form of Nile to Oxus oikumene, and so did the US cannon boats opening Japanese harbors in the 19th century of our common area. On the other hand, trading routes organized usually in former times as intermediary connecting paths between fixed stations, caravanseries, trading posts from oasis to oasis to the next regional center, may favor both the proto-globalizing transfer of goods and messages and the maintenance, and also the maintenance of local custom, culture and cults within this chain of transmission. But they may also become forerunners of imperial expansion. The greatest flourishing of the Silk Road, or Silk Roads, was, as we know, the result of the Pax Mongolica after the great Mongolian conquests in the Middle Ages, connecting for the first time the Eurasian heartlands to the fertile crescent of the Nile to Oxus rimlands by one political reign. To some extent, this Mongolian rule, combining direct and indirect rule, direct conquests with local vassal kingdoms, permitted also the continuation of both religious transfer and the preservation of ethnic or religious diasporas, elements that already had characterized the dispersion and multiplication of religious identities along the Silk Roads, where we had the Khazar kingdoms, where they had the Manichaeic kingdoms, and all elements that later changed, not least after the Islamization of the Asian empires. So empires can and did facilitate the infrastructural condition of religious proto-globality, often enhancing religious plurality. But they can and did also promote hegemonic imperial religions and suppress other religions. So the relation between imperial and religious expansion is a complicated one, as the comparison between the Christianized Roman Empire and the Chinese Empire could show. I limit me only to the Christian part. Christian monotheism could indeed favor a kind of imperial political theology, one God, one empire, one emperor, but only to the price of suppressing inner Christian plurality. the Byzantine, East Roman Empire, probably persecuted Christian dissidents, monophysites or miaphysites, as they're today called, Nestorians and others, even harder than other monotheistic faiths, Jews and Muslims, with whom a pragmatic modus vivendi was possible. Imperial religion can promote religious globalization so in a very paradoxical way, by forcing different and dissident variants of the official monotheism to immigrate, to seek the shelter of a foreign heathen or non-Christian king, thereby somehow repeating the experience of Judaism after the destruction of the Second Temple. So, in the Latin West, Christianity, after the end of the Roman Empire, developed a double institutionalization, the differentiation between the secular and the spiritual, which later proved rather apt for institutional globalization of religion, parallel to, but not totally dependent on the Christian empires, Catholic or later Protestant also. In the East, a more and more immobile imperial Christianity of Byzantium expelled and thereby produced a diaspora Christianity of the Oriental churches, amongst them both variants of the Syriac church, the Monophysite and the Nestorian variants, east and west of Antiochia, which may be the probable historical origin of the St. Thomas Christians in India in the first millennium of the Common Era. The local Indian, Persian, later also Western history of both diasporic and autochthon Christianity in India is now being documented, digitalized, reconstructed in an impressive research and archive project of Istvan Percel, which is done if it gets financiation at the Bochum GHK, with a very bold hypothesis where Istvan tries to connect the existence and the development of this autochthon Indian Christianity very strictly to two elements: the sea trade between India and the Arab Mediterranean area, documented archaeologically from the Roman Empire to the Middle Ages, and the existence of special social or societal niches, interstices in the caste system for monotheistic sea traders and craftsmen, be they Christian, Jews or Muslims, the Mappila. So the Southern Silk Road, or the Southern Spaces Road, the Sea Road, from Alexandria, Egypt, via Ethiopia, Aden, across the Arab or Indian Ocean, is then the third theater of early precursors of religious globalization, which is object of research projects at Bochum. Later, pre-modern and modern Christian globalization will encounter each other. In India, in the conflicts between the Syrian Malabaric Christians and the first Catholic and later Protestant missionaries, and today perhaps the third wave of religious globalization, Western, Protestant, Pentecostal or evangelical missionaries, can be seen by these autochthon Indian Christians as well as a sustaining force or help, but also as a globalizing menace to their own identity, destroying their autochthon historical memory by standardizing the Protestant type of Bible reading. Anyway, the next big step of religious globalization, and here I end my first counterpoint, comes with the early modern era, the social, political and cognitive separation between the religion and science, religion and politics, religion and philosophy within the West are also the result of encounters of Western missionaries in India, in China. And this is a much more familiar terrain in the globalization debate, with the questions about the role of mission for imperial expansion and the vanguard role of the Jesuit order. We have spoken about it already yesterday, but I just wanted to highlight less known points of research that were new for me also, and where in Bochum I have learned a lot in these debates. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Otto. After these remarks on historical preconditions of religious globalization, I would like to share with you, or I better should say, I would have liked to share with you some observations on the emergence of a global religious field in contemporary times. But apropos time, since we are running out of time, I don't. Not yet. No, we have more. You don't know what. You know, we have four parts all in all. But I try to keep it short. I will start with some observations on the inner boundaries of a global religious field, and then turn to at least some aspects of outer boundaries. And now it gets statistically. The term religion, respectively the attribute religious, and its translation into other languages seem to be accepted in many parts among the world population. Just take the findings of the World Values Survey, as already mentioned by Jan Scholte yesterday, as an indicator for this. Don't take it, positivistically, just as an indicator, and it shows that more than 99% of the respondents gave an answer to the question whether they consider themselves either as a religious person, not as a religious person, or as a convinced atheist. And on this slide you can see the distribution, and I don't go into detail, only saying that between 1981 and 2004, the amount of respondents who consider themselves as a religious person, whatever this means, in detail, I'm only at the semantic level now, so that the amount of respondents who consider themselves to be a religious person inclines, and the sum of those who do not consider themselves as a religious person declines accordingly. These findings might serve as an indicator for the fact that the global religious field has become larger at the level of individuals. This, among other reasons, might be caused by the decline of political ideologies after 1989 and so on. Not only more people consider themselves as a religious person, but also the importance of religion, as you can see, hopefully, no you won't, as you should see on the x-axis of this diagram, and the comfort and strength people get from their religion has risen, as you should see on the y-axis. Thus, the global religious field does not only get larger at the quantitative level, but also intensified at the qualitative level. However, there are denominational differences that, among others, Jose Casanova refers to. According to the fourth wave of the World Values Survey conducted between 1999 and 2004, religion is much more important in life and has a deeper impact for Muslim and evangelical respondents, what a surprise, than for Buddhists and members of Orthodox churches or those who do not adhere to any denomination. Roman Catholics, Hindus and Protestants are situated near the average here. So these are only some rough impressions on contemporary developments with regard to the inner boundaries. When it comes to the outer boundaries, and you should see some colored bubbles there, when it comes to the outer boundaries of an emerging global religious field, it firstly is important to consider that although the global religious field emerges by differentiating itself from other societal fields, it interacts with them. It's a kind of precondition. Something can only interact with something other. It is differentiated, at least to a certain extent. And distinction does not mean separation or isolation. It's very important. Secondly, societal differentiation is not a unilinear process, as elder sacralization theories somehow claim, with a point of no return. It starts in ancient time, is still continuing, and is not irreversible. Looking at the global scale, we are witnessing blurring boundaries between religion and other societal fields. But this does not necessarily mean that religion is dissolving, or that the entire culture and every societal element becomes religious. Religion proceeds as a distinct field and at the same time intersects with other fields, as this figure should show. Due to reasons of time, I skip the examples. Politics is a huge topic. The American campaign, I just took the recent one. For sure, as in the entire American history, religion and politics intersect with each other. But however, the interference between religion and politics can only happen if both fields proceed distinguished from each other. And by the way, a political party convention is not the same as a religious service, although they might share some formal or even content-related elements. Religion also intersects with medicine and even with arts. I just took Caspar David Friedrich, Madonna, Francis Bacon as examples. In short, observing blurring boundaries between religion and other societal fields does not necessarily mean that religion is dissolving within processes of globalization. Intersection needs differentiation as a basis, not only logically but also empirically. As a theoretical basis for this, I would like to refer to Georg Simmel's Religioide, religiöse Halbprodukte. I don't know how to translate it. Religiate, can you say this? Semi-finished religious products. Horst Jürgen Helle translates it. I don't know. Religion-like processes. They are at the basis, and they are the potential for religion, but it is very important to my conviction to distinguish at least two trajectories. One is leading to what we might call recursive religion. Niklas Luhmann calls it autopoiesis. Max Weber speaks of Eigengesetzlichkeit, and so on. And on the other hand, sacralization processes are taking place where religious elements are used to enrich other social entities in order to provide a certain aura, but it is not the same as what I would consider as recursive religion. Yeah, so sacralization might be the blurred boundary and interface between religion and other societal fields. The distinction between recursive religion and processes of sacralization is not only, but especially part of modern contemporary globalization processes. Yeah, in the last part of our talk, Otto will deal with the question why space matters and turn to processes of sacralization of political space under the condition of globalization. Thank you.
Okay, as I said before, because I did not pay attention to the time, now very shortly, just 5 remarks. The first would on globality and the religious field. The first would be rather banal. Yeah? There is the very concept of globality is a paradoxical one, because the global does not refer to any specific place. It is more, in German we say Grenzbegriff. It's rather indicating a possible direction of social evolution than describing any actual state situation. First remark. Globality is, and so it is a kind of programmatical concept that also has religious connotations. In 1910, this is my second element of remark, concepts of religious globality. There have been concepts of religious globality within social sciences. You already mentioned José Casanova. When he's speaking of global denominationalism, he means the disentangling, disembedding of this or that religious message from any anchorage in a geographical territory or political or social space. And this is very observable as well in religious fundamentalism in Protestant forms, but also, and yesterday Raja, in her remarks on the new dangerous developments in, well, Muslim religious and legal debates, is also referring to the element of a globalized ideal ummah in Muslim fundamentalism. And also another social scientist, Olivier Roy, perhaps the most important specialist on Muslim development in Central Asia, has spoken on the danger of this deterritorialization of a more or less fictive religious identity. One can even come to the recently caused debates about, well, the religious or political or social identity of the killers of Boston. But there are also social or political concepts of religious globality. I would rather schematically name three possible notions. The global field, global religious field, can be seen as a global religious supermarket, global denominationalism, and you can buy and choose the religion, choose the church of your own choice, as they say in America. The global field can be seen as forum of inter-religious debate in search for the true religion, and then the beginning of the modern era. In Europe, Nikolaus von Kues, in his famous debate on the religious peace, organized it. But as at the same time, 40 years later, Mughal Akbar had those debates in India. And the third variant of interpretation of a global religious field would be the global field as a battlefield of the fight between competing world religion. You might even say a kind of Darwinistic fight, the survival of the fittest. Which are the religions that suit most to the religious, to the global condition? And third remark, when we now speak of the becoming important of religious identity in political conflicts, this does not mean, or this should not necessarily mean, that the social or political function of religious messages, institutions, or identification become a mere instrument of other political or economical fields. On the contrary, as a mere instrument, religion would not promote or produce any identification at all. It is the condition of the distinction of the religious from the political field that enables the political the religious investment of political space. And to this, as an example for this, that is my fourth remark, I just name three religious investments of political territoriality. The first one is a rather traditional one that in recent years has also become object of a theological debate. That is the political identification, self-identification of Christian orthodoxy in Russia with the territorial of the Holy Russia, which even in the last important document, the social doctrine of the Russian Orthodox Church, which has been translated in a brilliant translation here in St. Augustine by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, is defined as canonical territory. The unity of the people of God has a territorial element, and this produces within Christianity, obviously, a cultural clash to Roman Catholicism, who is institutionally global, deterritorialized institution, which not exclude that in some historical phases it has been rather very institutionally protecting Catholic kingdoms. The second example, which reminds us of elements of our own social history, is the essay of the Chinese state authorities to control the religions on their territory. One famous example, it's a rather funny one. We all know the debates which are also in St. Augustine by the Steiner Missionare, very well documented, the Chinese control and clashes with the Catholic Church. But you can also take the juristic paragraph which is statuating the way of how reincarnate Buddhas are to be regularized within China, which reminds us to the Investiturstreit, to the very idea that the sovereign has to control the religious authority, which is then part of the Chinese Tibetan debate. And the third example I already had mentioned, which is territory and globality in religious terrorism. Even religiously motivated political terrorism is a global phenomenon. The global and not only symbolical nomadism of the political religious group and brand Al-Qaeda has been a successful marker and mobilizer in various local political conflicts about resources, membership and state power. Theaters as different as post-war Iraq, Sunnis against Shiites, ethno-national conflicts in Mali, where Al-Qaeda has been occupying political and geographical spaces as parasite of local conflicts, and maybe in a near future or even presence in Syria. We have a very complex re-entangling of the of the religious global elements in a local, even national political field. I began with distinguishing concepts and metaphors. I might come back with a final remark to a metaphor, which comes of my Christian background. The first globalizer, or one of the first prophets of globalization, was obviously St. Paul. Deculturalization of religion, dissolution, any necessary identity of religion and ethos, of ethnos, of the Jewish ethnos, and of the territory. And he, in his famous second letter to the Thessalonians, speaks as well of the element of apocalypse, the dissolution of every fixed identity in front of the final decision, and the element that holds back, which is in Greek the katechon, named in the neutrum, katechon, the element that holds back, or as a personification, the son of perdition, katechon, that holds back. This metaphor means that religion can be an element of dissolution, of political territoriality, and an element of fortification of it. Thank you.